It hurts being without a man, the giant Apache girl said the shy farmer. Eli Carter had spent his entire life standing at the edges of the world, far from the noise of town, far from the warmth of belonging, and locked deep inside a silence he had learned to call home. A man who spoke little because he had learned early that the more a person speaks, the more they risk being wounded. And so his small farm became the only place where he felt understood, where the soil responded honestly to whatever effort he gave it, where the rhythm of labor replaced conversation and routine replaced hope, waking before light touched the land, working until his hands could no longer remember softness, and returning each night to the same wooden cabin with nothing but quiet, waiting for him inside. And slowly that quiet stopped feeling empty, because it was all he had ever known. Until one evening, when fate broke into his routine. Without warning, as he walked near his fence line and saw a body lying ahead in the dirt, at first thinking exhaustion had tricked his eyes, but as he drew closer, the sharp scent of blood and the faint rise and fall of breathing snapped him into reality, and there she was, tall even in collapse, dust on her face, blood on her sleeve, yet something unbroken in her presence that made his fear rise instantly, because the stories he had heard about Apache warriors were filled with violence and vengeance. Yet beneath that fear another force moved stronger, forcing his trembling hands to lift her, forcing his feet to carry her back to his cabin, even as his mind screamed that he was bringing danger straight into his life. And with every step he felt as if he were walking across a line that could never be crossed again. For 2 days she drifted between consciousness and darkness while Eli cared for her in complete silence, cleaning her wounds, changing her bandages, setting water and food beside her without ever daring to meet her eyes, his shyness clinging to him more stubbornly than fear itself. And then on the 3rd day she opened her eyes fully and looked straight at him, not with suspicion and not with gratitude, but with a steady awareness that made his chest tighten. And when she spoke, her name is Ayanna, he felt the weight of that name settle in the room as if it carried a history he could not yet see. And in the nights that followed, when pain kept her awake, she began telling him pieces of that history, not as legend but as memory, of a people scattered by betrayal, of trust turned into blood, of family taken and never returned, while Eli in return spoke of a life that had never known war but had known emptiness all too well, a life where rejection was avoided by never offering anything to be rejected in the first place. And though their lives could not have been shaped by more different forces, they came to recognize the same wound in each other, the wound of carrying life alone. As Ayanna slowly regained her strength, she began moving through the cabin like someone who belonged to motion itself, helping with work without being asked, learning the patterns of the land with quiet focus. And Eli felt his world begin to stretch in ways that unsettled and awakened him at the same time, feeling how the silence he once cherished now carried the shape of her presence. And one night, as the lamplight cast long shadows against the walls, and neither of them spoke for a long time, Ayanna finally said the words that cut deeper than any accusation ever could. It hurts being without a man, not spoken with weakness and not as a request, but as the truth of a soul that had survived too long without companionship. And in that moment Eli understood, for the first time, that the life he had called peaceful might only have been a quieter form of pain. And after that night something unspoken but powerful settled between them. Not a promise and not a confession of love, but a recognition that neither of them was as alone as they once believed. The days continued in steady motion, Ayanna taking part in the work as if it anchored her, Eli watching as his careful routines were slowly reshaped by the presence of another heartbeat in his world. Villagers glancing from a distance with judgment and curiosity, tangled together in their stares. And yet for the first time Eli did not feel the need to hide himself from those eyes, because something inside him had begun to straighten instead of shrink, though he did not yet understand its full meaning. And still beneath all of it, the shadow of Ayanna's past remained alive and moving, unseen but approaching, patient as any hunter, waiting for the moment when the quiet world they had begun to build would no longer be able to shield them from what followed her across the land. The past did not announce its arrival with chaos but with certainty, riding slowly into Eli's life one afternoon in the form of 3 armed men, whose eyes carried recognition before their mouths ever spoke. And when they said Ayanna's name aloud, the quiet world Eli had begun to trust cracked open with a sound he could not hear but could feel deep in his chest, because he understood instantly that whatever she had fled from had never truly been left behind, and the debt they spoke of was older than his cabin, older than the road that led to it, built from blood spilled in a war he had never seen and yet was now standing inside. And when they demanded she come with them to answer for that past, Ayanna did not beg and did not run. She only stood still and looked at Eli, with an honesty so raw that it frightened him more than their weapons ever could, because in that silent look lived the truth that the choice was now his to make, and in the space of those few heartbeats, he felt every instinct that had shaped his life rise up to pull him backward into safety, into invisibility, into the old habit of letting the world pass him by untouched. Yet something stronger rose beneath it, something born the night she spoke of pain and loneliness as truth instead of weakness, and with a voice that trembled, but did not collapse, he stepped forward and told the men she was not going anywhere. And the moment those words left him, he felt his entire life shift behind him like a door, slammed shut forever. The violence that followed was sudden and imperfect, nothing like the stories that make heroes out of men, driven instead by desperation and resistance and the simple refusal to surrender. Eli moving with no skill and no grace, guided only by the certainty that retreat would break something inside him that could never be repaired.
Ayanna fighting not as a legend,
but as a woman who had already lost too much to lose again. And when the dust finally settled and the men were gone, the ground held more truth than victory, because Eli lay, bleeding with the pain tearing through him like fire and his strength draining into the soil he had spent his life tending. And as Ayanna pressed her hands against the wound to keep him alive, the warrior within her finally fell away, and she wept openly, not from fear of death but from the terror of nearly surviving alone once again. The days that followed were slow and heavy with uncertainty, Eli drifting in and out of fever while Ayanna remained beside him without leaving even when exhaustion bent her shoulders. And in those long hours, survival became an act of shared will rather than individual endurance. And when Eli finally returned, fully to himself, he did not wake as the man he had been, but as someone reshaped by the truth of what he had chosen, his body weaker for a time, but his spirit no longer folded inward by habit. And as his strength returned piece by piece, the world beyond the cabin began to look different, not smaller but sharper, more honest, no longer a place he observed from a distance, but one he now stood inside with both feet planted. In the evenings when pain no longer ruled his breath, they spoke more openly than ever before, no longer circling wounds but laying them bare. And Eli told her what he had never said aloud, that fear had shaped his entire life, that he had believed invisibility was safety, and that love was a luxury meant for braver men. And Ayanna listened without interruption and then told him the truth of her own survival, that strength without belonging slowly turns into another kind of prison, and that for all her battles and victories, the greatest wound she had carried was the belief that no place could ever truly be hers again. And in that exchange, neither of them made promises, and neither of them claimed certainty, but something far stronger settled between them, a shared understanding that they were no longer walking alone. Even if the path ahead remained uncertain, the land returned to its routines and the cabin returned to its quiet. Yet the silence was no longer empty but shaped by shared breath and shared purpose. Villagers no longer watched from a distance as if expecting disaster, but as if recognizing something rare they did not fully understand. And Eli found that the shy man who once avoided every confrontation had been replaced not by a hero but by someone willing to be seen, willing to fail in the open rather than survive in the shadows. While Ayanna no longer carried every step as though it might be her last, moving instead with the steadiness of a person who had chosen to stay rather than run, the world beyond them did not grow gentler, and the dangers of her past did not vanish, but the meaning of those dangers changed, no longer symbols of inevitability, but challenges that would be faced together. And in time, stories traveled across the land, not of a fearless warrior or a sudden hero, but of a quiet farmer who learned to stand and a wounded survivor who learned to belong. And though neither of them ever named what they had become to each other in grand words, their lives spoke for them in the way they worked side by side, healed side by side, and faced the unknown side by side, proving in the softest and strongest way that endurance alone is only survival, but endurance shared becomes a life worth protecting.